Courtroom number 4 was more crowded than usual that day. People sitting on the wooden benches were not there just to witness a simple divorce case. There was a feeling that something unusual was about to happen. Judge Michael Anderson was already seated, his case file open in front of him. From his expression, it was clear this would not be a simple matter. At the center of the courtroom stood Ayesha Malik. She wore a simple white suit, no heavy makeup, no jewelry. Her eyes looked tired, yet there was a quiet strength in them. She was silent, but her silence did not look like weakness. Across from her, Zaid Khan sat beside his expensive lawyer, a black coat, confident posture, a faint smile on his face. It was the kind of smile that comes when someone believes they are already winning. Zaid shifted in his seat and laughed softly. This case will be over before lunch. The judge struck the gavel. Court is now in session. Zaid's lawyer, Robert Hill, stood up. Your Honor, this case is straightforward. My client has been financially and emotionally burdened by his wife for years. She had no independent identity, no contribution, and no credibility. A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Several people looked toward Ayesha. She remained perfectly still. Robert Hill continued, Your Honor, Mrs. Malik has relied completely on my client. She has no background, no family support, and no standing of her own. Zaid laughed lightly. Exactly. The judge gave him a sharp look. Mr. Khan, control yourself. Robert spoke again. Frankly, Your Honor, my client is being generous by offering her a minimal settlement. She should be grateful. Those words hit Ayesha like a slap, yet she did not lower her eyes. She stood straight. Ayesha's lawyer, Daniel Ross, stood up. Your Honor, the defense is making accusations. Mrs. Malik has given the most valuable years of her life to this marriage. Robert Hill interrupted. Objection, emotional drama. The judge signaled Daniel to continue. Daniel looked at Ayesha. Mrs. Malik, would you like to tell the court what you gave up for this marriage? Ayesha took a deep breath. I gave up my peace. I gave up my dreams. I chose to become only a wife. Zaid laughed. Being a wife is not an achievement. Gasps filled the courtroom. The judge struck the gavel hard. Enough. He looked at Ayesha. Mrs. Malik, continue. Ayesha lifted her head. I gave her everything because I believed this relationship was built on respect. But today, Zaid laughed again. The judge's voice grew firm. Mr. Khan, this is your final warning. The atmosphere inside the courtroom became heavy. This no longer felt like a divorce case. It felt like humiliation. Ayesha fell silent, perhaps because she had nothing left to say, or perhaps because she knew the real story had not yet begun. At that moment, there was movement. Outside the courtroom doors, security opened the door, and then a small girl walked in. She looked no older than 10 years old. Her clothes were simple, her hair was tied back, her face was clean, but her eyes carried a story written on the streets. The judge asked in surprise, Who is this child? The courtroom fell silent. Ayesha looked at the girl. For the first time, tears filled her eyes because this was not just a street girl. This was the truth. The truth that would shake the entire court. The silence that spread inside the courtroom was not just surprise. It was the kind of silence that appears when truth stands at the door, waiting to enter. The small girl stood in the center of the courtroom. Her steps were light, but her presence felt heavy. Judge Michael Anderson asked directly, Who brought this child here? The security officer replied, Your Honor, the child was standing outside, she said. This case concerns her. Whispers filled the courtroom again. People began looking at one another. Ayesha Malik's eyes remained fixed on the girl. Tears were still there, but alongside them was a strange sense of calm. The judge looked at the girl and spoke gently. Child, what is your name? The girl answered softly. Myra. The judge asked, Myra, why have you come here? Myra wrapped her fingers together. Her voice trembled slightly, but her words carried truth. I came here because they said, today is the day when truth is spoken. The courtroom fell silent again. The judge leaned back slightly. Who said this? Myra looked directly at Aisha. She did. Zaid Khan's face turned pale, then red. Your Honor, this is ridiculous, he said. A street child cannot be connected to this case. The judge responded firmly. Mr. Khan, you will remain silent until the court allows you to speak. Zaid adjusted his tie nervously. Daniel Ross stood up. Your Honor, this child was under Mrs. Malik's care for several years. A wave of shock passed through the courtroom. Robert Hill immediately objected. This is irrelevant. The judge looked at both sides. The court will decide. What is irrelevant? Proceed. Daniel turned toward Myra. Myra, can you tell the court how you know Aisha Malik? Myra took a deep breath. I used to live on the street, near the station. People would look at us, but never truly see us. She paused, then continued. Then one day, she came. She pointed toward Aisha. She gave me food. She gave me clothes. She only asked me my name. No sound remained in the courtroom. Only Myra's voice. Myra. The judge asked, did you live with her? Myra nodded. Yes. She took me to school, helped me with homework. She never shouted at me. Aisha closed her eyes. Memories returned. Zaid Khan said impatiently, this is emotional manipulation. The judge stopped him immediately. Mr. Khan, one more interruption, and you will be removed. Daniel continued. Your Honor, Mrs. Malik never legally adopted Myra, but she never hid her either. This was simply kindness. Robert Hill said, but my client had no knowledge of this. Daniel turned back sharply. Exactly. A murmur spread again. The judge looked at Aisha. Ms. Malik, is this true? Aisha replied softly, yes. The judge asked, then why did you not tell the court earlier? Aisha lowered her gaze. Because I never thought anyone would care. Those words echoed through the courtroom. The judge turned back to Myra. Myra, why did you want to come here today? Myra answered plainly, because she said I was her responsibility. And when there is responsibility, there is also truth. Moist eyes appeared throughout the courtroom. Zaid Khan's face had grown rigid. This is a setup, he muttered. The judge replied, the court will decide that. The judge directed security to seat Myra nearby. The court will take this testimony under consideration. Aisha looked at Myra. Their eyes met. A promise passed without words. The atmosphere inside the courtroom had completely changed. What once felt like humiliation was now turning into humanity and responsibility. The judge struck the gavel. Proceedings will continue. But everyone knew this was no longer just a marriage case. It had become a case of truth, and truth, when spoken by a child, carries the greatest weight. The silence inside the courtroom was no longer just surprise. It was now the silence that comes before a decision. Judge Michael Anderson sat upright in his chair and said, the court will now seriously consider this testimony. Zaid Khan's restlessness could no longer be hidden. His fingers tapped repeatedly on the table. His face looked rigid, but fear was clearly visible in his eyes. For the first time, he felt that things were slipping out of his control. Robert Hill leaned closer and whispered, stay calm, this is just an emotional angle. But Zaid knew this was not just emotion, this was an attack on the image he had built for years. The judge looked toward Daniel Ross. Mr. Ross, would you like to present your next witness? Daniel nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Daniel signaled to the security officer, please bring the social worker. The courtroom door opened, and a woman entered. She looked to be around 40 years old, simple clothes, a serious face, a file in her hand. The judge asked, state your name. Emily Carter, she replied. I am a certified social worker. Daniel began questioning. Ms. Carter, can you tell the court how you know Myra? Emily opened her file. Myra was identified near the station area. She was part of a group of street children. A quiet stare moved through the courtroom. Emily continued. Mrs. Malik voluntarily took responsibility For Myra's care, she ensured schooling, medical treatment, and emotional stability. Robert Hill stood up immediately. Objection. Voluntary care. Has no leg. All standing. The judge replied calmly. Objection noted. Continue. Emily looked toward Myra. This child showed significant improvement after entering a stable environment. Daniel asked, was there any financial misuse involved? Emily answered directly, no. All expenses were personally covered by Mrs. Malik. Zaid shifted in his seat. So she was hiding things from me, he said angrily. The judge stopped him at once. Khan, you are out of order. Daniel continued. Ms. Carter, did Mr. Khan ever inquire about Myra? Emily shook her head. No, there is no record of any inquiry. Whispers spread again through the courtroom. The judge looked toward Zaid. Khan, is this accurate? Zaid hesitated before answering. I had no idea, he said. She never told me. Aisha Malik spoke softly. I was never given the chance. The judge looked at her. Miss Malik, explain. Aisha lifted her gaze. Every time I tried to speak, I was told these things were pointless. Those words echoed through the room. Daniel said, Your Honor, this shows a pattern of silencing. Robert Hill responded, This is speculation. The judge replied, Patterns are built from behavior. Judge Anderson thanked Emily Carter and dismissed her. Then the judge called Zaid Khan to the witness stand. Zaid stood up. His steps were heavy. He tried to appear confident, but his voice did not support him. Daniel asked, Khan, were you aware of your wife's charitable work? Zaid replied, No. Daniel asked again, Did you ever ask? Zaid answered, No. Daniel paused, then said, Then on what basis do you claim Mrs. Malik made no contribution? The courtroom fell completely silent. Zaid tried to hide his anger. She did nothing for my success, he said. Daniel responded calmly. She raised a child you never knew existed. Those words hit Zaid like a slap. The judge made notes. This court acknowledges emotional and social contribution. Zaid looked nervously toward Robert. Robert began. Cross-examination. Mrs. Malik, did you legally adopt Myra? Aisha replied, No. Robert said, Then this was charity, not responsibility. Aisha answered steadily, Humanity is greater than legal papers. A soft clap was heard in the courtroom, which the judge immediately stopped. This court will not tolerate disruption. The judge placed his pen down. Court will recess for 30 minutes. The gavel struck. During the break, Zaid stood in the hallway with his lawyer. This was all planned. Zaid said, I'm being trapped. Robert replied quietly, You destroyed your own image. Outside the courtroom, Aisha sat beside Myra. Myra asked softly, Did I do something wrong? Aisha held her hand. No, you spoke the truth. Myra nodded. I was scared. Aisha smiled gently. Those who speak the truth always feel a little afraid. When the break ended and the court resumed, everyone knew the case had crossed a line. It was no longer about humiliation. It was about accountability. When the court resumed after the break, the atmosphere had completely changed. The people who had come only to watch a spectacle were now witnesses to truth. Judge Michael Anderson returned to his seat and struck the gavel. Court is back in session. Zaid Khan sat in his seat, but the confidence he once carried was gone. His eyes kept moving toward the door as if he was waiting for something or trying to escape something. The judge looked at the files and said, Based on what the court has heard so far, it is becoming clear that this is not just a divorce case. The courtroom fell silent. The judge turned to Daniel Ross. Mr. Ross, you may continue. Daniel stood up. Your Honor, I would like to present another witness. Robert Hill objected immediately. Your Honor, this case is moving in an emotional direction. The judge replied firmly. Truth is often emotional. Objection overruled. Daniel signaled security. Please call the next witness. The door opened, and a man entered. His name was Farhan Ali. He was a local shop owner. with a grocery store near the station. There was nervousness on his face, but courage in his eyes. The judge asked, "State your name and occupation." "Farhan Ali," he replied. "I own a grocery shop near the station." Daniel began questioning Mr. Farhan. "Do you know Myra?" Farhan nodded. "Yes, I have known her since she was very young." Daniel asked, "Where did she live?" Farhan answered, "On the street, sometimes near the platform, sometimes outside my shop." A quiet unease spread through the courtroom. Daniel continued, "Have you ever seen Aisha Malik?" Farhan looked at Aisha. "Yes, she is the woman." Aisha closed her eyes. She remembered how she quietly brought milk and food for Myra. Farhan said, "The girl was often with her, clean clothes, a school bag, and a smile on her face." Robert Hill spoke up. "Objection, this is merely observation." The judge replied, "Observation becomes evidence when it is consistent." Daniel asked, "Was Mr. Khan ever seen with this child?" Farhan answered immediately, "No." Whispers filled the courtroom again. Daniel asked, "Did you ever see Mr. Khan?" asking about Myra. Farhan replied, "Never." Zaid Khan shouted angrily, "They are all trying to trap me." The judge stopped him at once. "Mr. Khan, one more outburst, and you will be held in contempt." Zaid fell silent, but his restlessness was clear. Daniel said, "Your Honor, this testimony further confirms that Mrs. Malik quietly carried responsibility." The judge made a note. The judge then called Aisha Malik to the witness stand. Aisha stood up. Her steps were slow, but her back was straight. For the first time, she was speaking for herself. The judge said gently, "Mrs. Malik, can you tell the court why you did all this for Myra?" Aisha took a deep breath. "Because when I look at her, I saw my own loneliness." The courtroom remained silent. Aisha continued, "I did not want praise. I only wanted a child, not to sleep on the street." Robert Hill asked, "Did you inform your husband?" Aisha replied, "No." Robert said quickly, "Then this was concealment." Aisha answered calmly, "Concealment happens when there is fear. I simply did not believe he would understand." Those words echoed through the room. The judge looked toward Zaid. "Mr. Khan, do you wish to say anything?" Zaid stood up. "I am a busy man. It is not possible to notice everything." Aisha looked at him, but ignoring something is a choice. Silence filled the courtroom again. The judge leaned back in his chair. "This court has heard enough." He lifted the gavel. "The court will take this matter under advisement." The gavel struck as people left the courtroom. Their eyes were on Aisha. This time, there was no pity. There was respect. Myra walked over to Aisha and said softly, "You never made me feel alone." Aisha hugged her, and Zaid Khan stood alone. The pride that once gave him power had now become his burden. But the story was not over, because the court's final decision was still to come. The air outside the court was cold, but for Zaid Khan, even that air felt heavy. This was no longer just a case for him. It had become a test of his thinking, his personality, and his true identity. The man who once laughed in court was now running from himself with every step. Inside the court, Judge Michael Anderson sat in his chambers, reviewing the files. There was a firmness on his face, the kind that appears when justice is no longer limited to law alone, but touches the human conscience. This case was not ordinary for him either. The court resumed. "Court is now in session," the judge said. This time, the courtroom was even more crowded. The media had arrived. People were not just there to hear a verdict. They had come to see how truth wins. The judge looked toward Zaid Khan. "Mr. Khan, the court would like to ask you some direct questions." Zaid stood up. His voice was weaker than before. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge asked plainly, "Did you ever emotionally support your wife when she was struggling with loneliness?" Zaid remained silent for a few moments. I was busy with work, he replied. The judge asked, is being busy the same as being neglectful? The courtroom fell silent again. Zaid tried to answer, but no words came. The judge signaled. Daniel Ross, Mr. Ross, proceed. Daniel said, Your Honor, I would like to present some personal messages to the court. Robert Hill objected immediately. Objection, violation of privacy. The judge responded firmly. These messages are relevant. Objection overruled. Daniel presented the printouts. These messages were written by Mrs. Malik. In her personal diary, a quiet stir moved through the courtroom. Daniel began reading. Today, ID again to talk to Zaid, but he said he had no time. Aisha closed her eyes. Daniel read another line. Sometimes it feels like I don't even exist in this house. People in the courtroom grew uneasy. The judge looked toward Zaid. Mr. Khan, can you deny these statements? Zaid replied softly, no. It was a small word, but its weight was heavy. The judge continued, then why did you tell the court that Mrs. Malik made no emotional contribution? Zaid lowered his head. I thought this was normal. The judge asked, when did neglect become normal? Several people lowered their eyes. Daniel gestured toward Myra. Your Honor, this child is living proof of that neglect, Robert Hill said. My client cannot be held responsible for a child he did not know about. Daniel replied calmly. Ignorance is not innocence. The judge stopped his pen. The court agrees. The judge turned toward Aisha. Mrs. Malik, did you ever regret your silence? Aisha took a deep breath. Yes, but I also felt that making noise was not in my nature. The judge said, there is a difference between silence and weakness. The judge continued, this court also notes that Mrs. Malik's silence was taken advantage of. Zaid said anxiously, I never intended to humiliate her. Aisha spoke sharply for the first time, but you did so today in court. A deep silence filled the room. The judge said, order. He looked at Daniel. Anything further? Daniel replied, oh, enlie this, Your Honor. This is not just a divorce case. It is a case about a woman's dignity. The judge nodded. Robert Hill made a final attempt. My client is willing to revise the settlement. The judge replied, justice does not come from negotiation. The judge lifted the gavel. The court will reserve judgment. The gavel struck as people exited the courtroom. The media moved toward Aisha, but she said nothing. She walked forward silently. This time, her silence was not weakness. It was strength. Myra walked beside her. Will everything be okay? She asked. Aisha smiled. After truth, things always find their way. Behind them, Zaid Khan stood alone. He now understood. Some things must be realized on time, otherwise they stand before you in court as truth. But the story was not over. The day of judgment was near. The day of judgment was approaching, and the atmosphere inside the courtroom had grown heavier than before. Everyone knew that whatever would be said or heard now would not remain just legal. It would become a lifelong truth. Judge Mike Anderson sat in his chair, turning the pages of the files as if weighing every word. Once again, the courtroom bell rang. Court is now in session. When the judge looked up, there was a deep seriousness in his voice. Today, this court will hear final arguments. Zaid Khan was no longer the confident businessman he once appeared to be. There was exhaustion on his face, restlessness in his eyes. His movements showed that he was breaking. From within, Robert Hill stood up. Your Honor, my client acknowledges certain emotional gaps, but we must remain focused on legality. The judge looked at him directly. Mr. Hill, legality and human responsibility are often not separate. Daniel Ross also stood up. Your Honor, the final argument is not just about law, it is about truth. The judge nodded. Proceed. Daniel addressed the court. Mrs. Malik spent her entire life trying to save a relationship. Even when she was not understood, she did not raise her voice. Her silence was mistaken for weakness. Daniel looked toward Myra. This child is living proof that Mrs. Malik fulfilled responsibility, even in silence. A deep silence spread through the courtroom. Robert Hill said, "But goodwill does not equal obligation." Daniel replied, "Humanity is greater than obligation." The judge made a note. The judge then signaled Zaid Khan to stand. "Mr. Khan, this court will give you one final opportunity to speak." Zaid stood slowly. His voice was trembling. "I never thought my silence would become my crime," he said. "I believed providing money was enough." The judge asked, "And was it?" Zaid remained silent. For a moment, no. That small answer echoed through the courtroom. Aisha Malik looked at him. There was less pain in her eyes now, and more peace. The judge spoke again. "This court has observed a pattern," he continued, "a pattern of emotional neglect, public humiliation, and misuse of silence." Robert Hill made a weak attempt. "My client never intended harm." The judge responded firmly, "Intent does not erase impact." People in the courtroom sat straighter in their seats. The judge turned toward Aisha. "Mrs. Malik, before this court concludes, do you wish to say anything?" Aisha stood up. This time, her voice was clear. "I do not seek revenge," she said. "I only want my silence not to be mistaken for weakness." She looked at Myra. "And I do not want any child to stay silent because they believe their voice has no value." Tears filled many eyes in the courtroom. The judge lifted the gavel, but did not strike it yet. "This court recognizes dignity when it sees it." The judge continued, "Final judgment will be delivered tomorrow." The gavel struck as people exited the courtroom. Reporters stood outside again, but this time they were not just asking questions, they were writing a story. Aisha walked out, holding Myra's hand. "Are you scared?" Aisha asked softly. Myra nodded. "A little." Aisha smiled gently. "After truth, fear becomes smaller." On the other side, Zaid Khan sat alone on a bench. He had nothing left to say. For the first time, he realized, money is not everything, and some mistakes, when not understood in time, walk all the way into a courtroom. He stood up and walked out without meeting anyone's eyes. The city continued at its normal pace, but lives had paused, waiting for the decision. Tomorrow would not bring just a verdict. It would draw a clear line between truth and dignity, and everyone knew when the gavel struck tomorrow, it would echo not only in the court, but also in hearts. The next day was ordinary for the city, but for courtroom number 4, it was a day that would become history. From early morning, people had gathered outside the court. Media vans, cameras, reporters everywhere. Everyone wanted to know what the final decision would be, but for those sitting inside, this was not just a verdict. It was a turning point in life. Judge Michael Anderson entered the courtroom on time. The seriousness on his face was the kind that appeared when justice is not only about words but about conscience. The gavel struck. Court is now in session. The courtroom fell completely silent. The judge opened the files and said clearly, "Today, this court will deliver its final judgment." Aisha Malik sat in her seat. Her hands were clasped together. She was not nervous, but her heart was beating fast. Myra sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. That hand did not just offer courage. It offered certainty. On the other side, Zaid Khan sat quietly. His face was paler than before. No sleep in his eyes, only exhaustion and regret. He kept drinking water, as if his throat had gone dry. The judge began reading the decision. This court finds that the marriage between Mr. Khan and Mrs. Malik was marked by consistent emotional neglect. Even the sound of breathing could be heard. In the courtroom, the judge continued, "The court also finds that Mrs. Malik was publicly humiliated during these proceedings, without just cause. Zaid lowered his gaze. The judge said, "Furthermore, the court acknowledges Mrs. Malik's moral, emotional, and social contributions, including her care for a minor child in need." Myra squeezed Aisha's hand a little tighter. The judge paused briefly, then said, "This court rejects the claim that contribution is limited to financial income alone." A small movement passed through the room. The judge continued, "Mr. Khan's argument that ignorance removes responsibility is not accepted." Zaid closed his eyes. The judge said, "This court recognizes silence as strength when it is chosen with dignity, not as weakness to be exploited." Those words echoed through the courtroom. The judge read the final part. "Therefore, this court orders a revised settlement that reflects Mrs. Malik's contributions, dignity, and long-term well-being." The gavel struck. Some people's eyes filled with tears, others lowered their heads. The decision had been delivered. The judge said, "Mrs. Malik, you are free to rebuild your life with dignity." Then he looked toward Zaid. "Mr. Khan, this court hopes you reflect on what responsibility truly means." Court adjourned. Outside the courtroom, reporters rushed forward. "Mrs. Malik, how do you feel?" they asked. Aisha thought for a few seconds. Then she said, "I feel light." And she walked on. Myra asked softly, "Are we okay now?" Aisha smiled. "Yes, we are okay now." Zaid Khan walked out alone. No one questioned him. The cameras did not follow him. Today, the spotlight was not on him. And perhaps that was his greatest lesson. He sat for a while on a bench outside the court. He looked at his hands, the same hands that earned money, but never learned to hold relationships. The judge's words echoed in his mind. Responsibility truly means. Zaid stood up and disappeared into the crowd. Aisha and Meher got into the car and drove away. The city was the same, but their lives had changed. Aisha looked out of the window. There was peace on her face. Myra asked, "What will you do now?" Aisha smiled gently. "Now I will live." The story was almost complete, but one final part still remained, because after every verdict, there is a new beginning, and that beginning, after the verdict, the city returned to its normal life, but some lives had changed forever. Courtroom number 4 was now empty. The wooden benches that were once filled with emotions stood silent, but the truth those walls had heard would never be forgotten. That day, Aisha, Malik and Myra were driving away from the city in a small car. Trees lined both sides of the road. The air carried a quiet calm. Myra looked out of the window as if she was seeing the world safely. For the first time, Aisha asked softly, "Are you tired?" Myra shook her head. "No, I feel good." Those words were priceless to Aisha. It felt as if all her silent efforts had finally found their answer. A few days later, Aisha rented a small house. It was very simple. No luxury, no noise. But the house had dignity. It had peace. There was a small room for Myra. Colorful papers were placed on the walls. On the first night, as Myra lay down to sleep, she asked, "Will we live here?" Aisha smiled. "Yes, as long as you want." For the first time, Myra slept without fear. Zaid Khan's life, on the other hand, moved very differently. After the settlement, his circle of friends slowly disappeared. The people who were with him only for his success moved away. He realized that when the noise ends, real faces appear. One evening, Zaid sat alone in a cafe. The coffee in front of him had gone cold. He picked up his phone, saw Aisha's number, then put the phone back down. Some relationships do not return with a call. Myra's words echoed in his mind. When there is responsibility, there is also truth. That sentence had become his punishment. Months passed. Myra started going to school. A smile stayed on her face. She made drawings told stories, and called Ayesha Ummi. Each time she said that word, it touched Ayesha's heart. One day, it was parent day. At school, Ayesha walked into the classroom, holding Myra's hand. The teacher said, "Myra has improved a lot. She feels safe." Ayesha's eyes filled, but she held back her tears. These were not tears of weakness. They were tears of gratitude. Meanwhile, Zaid Khan began focus on his work, but his confidence was no longer the same. He started therapy. In the first session, when the therapist asked, "What do you regret the most?" After a long silence, Zaid said, "That I forgot how to listen." The answer was not easy, but it was necessary. Slowly, Ayesha began rebuilding her life. She started working with an NGO that helped street children. Myra often went with her. She spoke to other children, held their hands, and said, "Don't be afraid, everything becomes okay." These were words Ayesha herself had never once heard. One evening, Ayesha and Myra sat in a park. The sun was setting. Myra asked, "Ummi, can I grow up to be like you?" Ayesha looked at her in surprise. "Why do you want to be like me?" Myra replied innocently, "Because you are strong, even when you stay silent." For Ayesha, this was the greatest victory. One day, as Zaid Khan passed by the courthouse, he stopped and looked at the building. He took a deep breath and said to himself, "If only I had understood earlier." But time does not return. It only teaches lessons. The story ends here, not with one's humiliation, not with anyone's victory, but with a truth that a woman who stays silent is not weak, and a child who brings truth from the street to the courtroom is not just a witness. She's the voice of justice, and that was the voice that left the entire court stunned. The story is complete.